In 25 years of television, Oprah Winfrey had never stopped a live taping. But when single father Michael Williams whispered 6 words into his microphone, she didn't just stop the show, she stopped breathing. In 25 years of television, Oprah Winfrey had never stopped a live taping. But when single father Michael Williams whispered 6 words into his microphone, she didn't just stop the show, she stopped breathing. What happened next would become the most watched episode in Oprah show history. Not because of celebrity guests or giveaways, but because of a moment so raw, so devastating, that it reminded an entire nation what real courage looks like. This is that story. Chicago, November 15th, 2009. Harpo Studios was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy. Today's topic was single parents who beat the odds, a celebration of mothers and fathers who raised extraordinary children against impossible circumstances. The producers had carefully selected 5 families, each with an inspiring story of triumph over adversity. Michael Williams wasn't supposed to be the focus of today's show. He was guest number 4, scheduled for a brief 8-minute segment about raising his 3 children after his wife Sarah's death from breast cancer 2 years earlier. His 12-year-old daughter Emma, 10-year-old son Jake, and 8-year-old daughter Lily sat in the front row, beaming with pride as their father prepared to share their story of resilience. The Williams family looked picture perfect. Michael wore a crisp navy blue shirt that his late wife had bought him for their anniversary. The children were dressed in their Sunday best, hair perfectly combed, shoes polished. To everyone in that studio, they represented hope, proof that love could conquer even the deepest loss. But appearances, as Oprah had learned in decades of television, could be devastatingly deceiving. "Michael Williams, everyone," Oprah announced as she welcomed him to the couch. The audience applauded warmly as Michael settled into his seat, his eyes immediately finding his children in the crowd. They waved enthusiastically, holding up a homemade sign that read, "We love you, Daddy." "Michael, tell us about your beautiful family," Oprah began, her voice carrying that familiar warmth that had made millions of viewers feel like they were talking to their best friend. Michael's face lit up. "These are my 3 reasons for living," he said, gesturing toward his children. "Emma, Jake, and Lily. They've been my heroes since the day their mother died." Rehook. But what Michael was about to reveal would prove that even heroes have moments when they feel utterly powerless. "Tell us about Sarah," Oprah continued gently. She had done her homework, as always. She knew about the 2-year battle with breast cancer, the chemotherapy, the brief remission, and the devastating relapse that took Sarah Williams at just...
Michael's voice grew soft. She was everything. The kind of mother who packed love notes in lunchboxes, who stayed up all night when someone had a fever, who made our house feel like home. He paused, swallowing hard. "When she got sick, she made me promise that I'd always take care of our babies, that I'd never let them feel like they lost both parents."
The audience was already reaching for tissues. This was the kind of story Oprah's viewers loved. Heartbreaking but ultimately uplifting, showing the power of a father's love to heal a family's wounds. "And you've done an incredible job," Oprah said, consulting her notes. "Emma is in the gifted program at school. Jake is captain of his Little League team, and Lily just won first place in the science fair. Tell us your secret." That's when it happened. That's when Michael Williams' carefully constructed facade began to crack. Michael opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His hands, which had been resting calmly in his lap, began to tremble. He looked toward his children, who were still smiling and waving, completely unaware that their father was about to shatter in front of millions of people. "Michael?" Oprah asked, leaning forward. She had seen this before, guests overcome by emotion when talking about loved ones they'd lost. She expected tears, maybe a moment to compose himself. She didn't expect what came next. Michael started, then stopped. He tried again. "I can't." The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators, who had seen everything in their years of television production, sensed something different about this moment. This wasn't grief. This was something deeper, more desperate. Oprah moved closer on the couch. "Take your time, honey. Whatever you need to say, we're here to listen." Michael looked at her, and in his eyes, Oprah saw something that made her stomach drop. It was the look of a man drowning, of someone who had been treading water for so long that he had no strength left to keep his head above the surface. Rehook. What Michael whispered next would force Oprah to make a decision that went against every rule of professional television. "I'm failing them," Michael whispered into his microphone, his voice so quiet that the audio technicians had to strain to pick it up. "I'm failing them every single day, and I don't know how to stop." The words hung in the air like a confession at church. Oprah felt her breath catch. This wasn't what they had rehearsed. This wasn't the inspiring story of triumph she had been expecting. "What do you mean, Michael?" she asked gently, though something in her gut already knew this was about to go somewhere no one was prepared for. Michael's composure completely collapsed. The tears came first, not the dignified tears of a man mourning his wife, but the desperate sobs of someone who had been holding too much for too long. "The lights," he managed between sobs. "They're shutting off the lights tonight at 6 o'clock because I haven't paid the electric bill in 3 months. The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't supposed to be part of the show. The producers in the control room were frantically trying to figure out what was happening. "I lost my job," Michael continued, the words pouring out of him like water through a broken dam. "I lost my job 4 months ago, and I've been pretending to go to work every day because I can't bear to see the fear in their eyes. I drop them off at school and then I sit in parking lots applying for jobs on my phone until it's time to pick them up." Rehook. But the devastating truth Michael was about to reveal would prove that losing his job was only the beginning of his nightmare. Oprah had interviewed presidents and prisoners, celebrities and survivors. She had heard stories of abuse, addiction, and unimaginable loss. But something about Michael Williams' quiet desperation was hitting her in a place she didn't know still existed. "Michael," she said softly, "when was the last time you and the children had a real meal?" The question broke him completely. Michael buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the kind of sobs that come from the deepest places of shame and fear. "Tuesday," he whispered. "We had mac and cheese on Tuesday. Since then it's been peanut butter sandwiches. And we're almost out of peanut butter." Oprah Winfrey had built her career on asking the hard questions, on digging deeper when guests tried to hide behind comfortable narratives. But in this moment, watching a father fall apart while his children sat just yards away, completely unaware of the depth of his struggle, something fundamental shifted inside her. She looked toward Emma, Jake, and Lily Williams. They were still smiling, still proud of their daddy for being on television, still believing that everything was going to be okay because their father had told them it would be. Rehook. What Oprah did next had never been done in the history of daytime television, and it would change the Williams family's life forever. Without a word to her producers, without consulting her notes or following her script, Oprah stood up from the couch. She walked the few steps to where Michael sat, put her arms around him, and held him while he cried. The studio fell completely silent. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone, audience members, crew, producers, seemed to understand they were witnessing something unprecedented. "You are not failing them," Oprah whispered, loud enough for her microphone to pick up, but soft enough that it felt like a private conversation. "You are not failing them, Michael. You brought them here today because you love them. You get up every morning and you try because you love them. That's not failure. That's heroism." Michael clung to her like a drowning man clinging to a life preserver. "I don't know what to do," he sobbed. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't have to fix it alone," Oprah said. And as she spoke those words, she was already making decisions that would defy every protocol her producers had ever established. Oprah pulled back from Michael and looked directly into the main camera. When she spoke, it wasn't as a talk show host or a media mogul. It was as a human being who had just witnessed something that demanded action. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "we're going to do something a little different today. We're going to stop talking about inspiration and start being it." She turned to her producers, who were frantically gesturing from the control room, trying to remind her they had a show to finish, guests to interview, a schedule to maintain. "I need you to stop the taping," she announced to the stunned studio. "I need you to clear the next hour. And I need you to get me a phone." The audience was confused but captivated. They could sense they were watching television history being made, even if they didn't understand exactly what was happening. Rehook. But Oprah wasn't just stopping the show, she was about to make a series of phone calls that would mobilize an entire community in ways that had never been done before. Michael, Oprah said, sitting back down next to him, I want you to look at me. I want you to look at your children. And I want you to know that what's about to happen is going to change everything. She picked up the phone that a producer had handed her and dialed a number she knew by heart, her personal assistant. Get me the head of comment on the line, she said without preamble. Tell them Oprah Winfrey needs to speak with them about the Williams family account, and tell them I need to speak with them right now. The studio watched in amazement as Oprah Winfrey, one of the most powerful women in media, used her influence not for ratings or publicity, but for a family she had met just minutes earlier. Within minutes, Oprah had the power company's regional manager on the line. The conversation was brief and to the point. This is Oprah Winfrey, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who wasn't used to being told no. I have a family here whose power is being shut off tonight. 3 children who need electricity for homework, for meals, for safety. I want you to restore their service immediately, and I want you to give them a grace period to get back on their feet. The audience watched in stunned silence as she provided Michael's account information and made arrangements for the past due balance to be cleared. But she wasn't done. Not even close. Now, she said, hanging up and dialing another number. Let's talk about food. Rehook. What happened next would prove that when Oprah Winfrey decides to help someone, she doesn't just change their day, she changes their entire future. The second call was to the manager of the nearest grocery store. The third was to a local restaurant that had catered Oprah events before. The fourth was to a contact at the Chicago public school system to ensure the Williams children would have access to free breakfast and lunch programs. Michael sat beside her, overwhelmed and speechless, as this woman he had only met an hour earlier orchestrated a complete support system around his family. But that's not all, Oprah announced to the studio. She looked directly at Michael. You said you've been looking for work for 4 months. Tell me about your background. Through his tears, Michael managed to explain that he had been a project manager for a construction company, that he had 15 years of experience, that he had excellent references, but the economy had made jobs scarce. Oprah nodded and picked up the phone again. What the studio audience didn't know was that Oprah's influence extended far beyond television. Over the years, she had built relationships with business leaders, community organizers, and everyday people who believed in her mission of empowerment and service. The fifth call was to a construction company owner who had been a guest on her show the previous year. The sixth was to the head of a job placement agency that specialized in helping single parents find employment. I have a good man here, she told each caller. A father who's been dealt some hard blows but who's never given up on his children. I want you to meet with him this week. I want you to find him work that can support his family with dignity. The audience began to understand what they were witnessing. This wasn't just charity. This was community mobilization on a scale that most people could only dream of. Rehook, but the most powerful moment was still to come, when Oprah would force Michael to face the truth he'd been hating from the 3 people who mattered most. Michael, Oprah said, setting down the phone after her 7th call. There's one more thing we need to do, and it's going to be the hardest thing of all. She gestured toward Emma, Jake, and Lily, who were still sitting in the front row, still unaware of the crisis that had been swirling around them. You need to tell them the truth. Michael's face went white. I can't let them know how badly I failed them. You haven't failed them, Oprah said firmly. But you're failing them now by carrying this burden alone. Children are stronger than we think, and they deserve honesty from the people they trust most. What happened next would become one of the most powerful moments in television history. Not because it was scripted or planned, but because it was utterly, completely real. Oprah invited Emma, Jake, and Lily onto the stage. They bounced up from their seats, excited to be part of whatever surprise was happening for their father. Daddy, why are you crying? 8-year-old Lily asked as she climbed onto Michael's lap. Michael looked at Oprah, then at his children, and somehow found the courage to tell them the truth. Kids, he began, his voice shaking. Daddy needs to tell you something important. We're going through a really hard time right now. I lost my job, and we don't have enough money for some of the things we need. Rehook. What his children said next would prove that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from the smallest voices. 12-year-old Emma, wise beyond her years, looked at her father with eyes that held no judgment, only love. "Is that why you've been so sad lately?" she asked. "I thought maybe you were still missing Mommy too much." "I miss Mommy every day," Michael said, pulling all three children close. "But I've been sad because I was scared I couldn't take care of you the way she would have wanted me to." 10-year-old Jake, who had been quiet until now, spoke up with the matter-of-fact tone that only children can manage. "But Daddy, we don't care about money. We just care about you. And Mom used to say that families stick together no matter what." The entire studio was in tears. Even the camera operators were struggling to keep their equipment steady as they witnessed this raw display of familial love. Lily, the youngest, looked up at her father with complete confidence. "Are we going to be okay, Daddy?" Michael looked at Oprah, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, baby," he said, and for the first time in months he actually believed it. "We're going to be okay." The episode aired 3 weeks later, and the response was unprecedented. The Oprah Winfrey Show had received emotional responses before, but nothing like this. The network was flooded with calls from viewers wanting to help the Williams family, offering everything from job opportunities to college scholarships for the children. But more importantly, Michael Williams had found work before the episode even aired. The construction company owner, Oprah, had hired him within a week, offering him a position with a salary that could support his family comfortably. Rehook. But the true impact of that day wouldn't be fully understood until years later, when one small decision would ripple outward to change thousands of lives. The episode sparked something bigger than anyone had anticipated. Oprah announced the creation of the Single Parent Support Network, a nationwide program that connected struggling single parents with resources, job opportunities, and community support. Within a year, the network had helped over 10,000 families. Within 5 years, it had become a model that was replicated in cities across the country. But for Michael Williams, the most important change was much simpler and more profound. 2 years after that extraordinary taping, Michael Williams returned to Oprah's show. This time, he came not as someone seeking help, but as someone offering it. He had become a volunteer coordinator for the Single Parent Support Network, using his own experience to help other families navigate their darkest moments. Emma, now 14, had maintained her position in the gifted program and was talking about becoming a social worker. Jake, 12, was still playing baseball and had added volunteering at the local food bank to his weekend activities. Lily, 10, had won the science fair again and was building a project about how communities could better support families in crisis. "Michael," Oprah asked during that return visit, "what did you learn from that day when you thought you had lost everything?" Michael smiled, surrounded by his thriving children, and gave an answer that perfectly captured the lesson his story had taught millions of viewers. "I learned that asking for help isn't giving up, it's growing up. I learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the beginning of strength. And I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that you can't do everything alone." Rehook. But perhaps the most powerful lesson came from someone unexpected, and it would stay with Oprah for the rest of her career. Before they left the studio that second time, 8-year-old Lily had one more thing to say to Oprah. "Miss Oprah," she said with the serious tone that children use when they have something important to share, "thank you for helping my daddy remember that it's okay to be sad sometimes. Mom used to say that brave people aren't the ones who never get scared, they're the ones who ask for help when they need it." That episode, which came to be known as the day Oprah stopped the show, became a defining moment not just for the Williams family, but for everyone who witnessed it. It reminded viewers that behind every carefully constructed public image, there might be someone drowning in private struggles. It showed that real strength comes not from pretending everything is perfect, but from having the courage to be honest about our imperfections. Most importantly, it demonstrated that when we choose compassion over judgment, when we choose action over sympathy, we can change lives in ways we never imagined possible. Rehook. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can give someone isn't money or resources. It's the simple reminder that they are not alone. Michael Williams still keeps a photo from that day in his wallet, not from the moment when Oprah made those life-changing phone calls, but from the moment when she simply sat down beside him and reminded him that struggling doesn't mean failing. In a world that often celebrates individual achievement and self-reliance, Michael's story became a powerful reminder that our greatest strength often comes from our willingness to reach out, to be vulnerable, and to trust that someone will catch us when we fall. Today, Michael Williams runs his own construction company, employing 15 people and specializing in building affordable housing for single-parent families. Emma graduated valedictorian from high school and is studying social work at Northwestern University on a scholarship funded by viewers of that Oprah episode. Jake earned a baseball scholarship to college and volunteers as a mentor for children who have lost parents. Lily is in high school, still winning science fairs, and has started a nonprofit that provides emergency financial assistance to families facing utility shutoffs. The Single Parent Support Network that grew from that November day has helped over 50,000 families nationwide, but perhaps more importantly, it has changed the conversation about what it means to struggle, what it means to ask for help, and what it means to be part of a community that cares for its most vulnerable members. Oprah often says that the Williams family taught her one of the most important lessons of her career, that the most powerful television happens not when we showcase extraordinary people doing extraordinary things, but when we honor ordinary people, finding extraordinary courage in their everyday struggles. Final rehook. Because in the end, we're all just trying to keep the lights on, feed our families, and find the courage to admit when we need help, and that's not failure, that's human. The episode won a Daytime Emmy Award, but more importantly, it won something far more valuable. It won the hearts of everyone who understood that sometimes the greatest act of love is admitting that love alone isn't always enough. Sometimes we all need someone to stop the show and remind us that we're not alone. If this story moved you, it's because you recognize the truth in Michael Williams' struggle. In a world that often demands we pretend everything is perfect, his courage to be vulnerable reminds us that our greatest strength comes not from hiding our struggles, but from sharing them. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that asking for help is an act of courage, not defeat. Subscribe for more true stories that restore faith in the power of human compassion, because sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply remind each other that we're not alone.